Meeting will come to order. Planning and Zoning Commission is an independent advisory board of the City of Ames City Council. The Planning and Zoning Commission members are volunteers of the community and not part of the city administration. The Planning and Zoning Commission is supported by staff from the city's planning division. The commission is responsible for recommendations on matters involving subdivisions, annexations, master plans, and major site development plans, as well as amendments to the zoning ordinance and comprehensive plan amendments. We make our recommendations based on city codes, the facts presented, and input from the public. As an advisory commission, we welcome all comments regarding the proposed item. Please direct your input to the commission. If the proceedings become lengthy, we may ask that comments be focused on new information not previously presented. You may speak only once on an agenda item. If you wish to speak, please fill out a speaker information card and present it to the recording secretary. We ask that you come to the microphone to speak so that all comments may be recorded. The order of the proceedings for each item on the agenda will be as follows. City staff will present the staff report regarding the agenda item. Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of city staff. The applicant will be invited to make a statement regarding the request. Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the applicant. Members of the audience will be invited to come forward and offer comments and questions. Once public comment is closed, city staff and the applicant will have an opportunity for concluding remarks. The commission will discuss the application based on all presentations and any comments given and come to a recommendation for the city council. The discussion may include further questions of the city staff and the applicant for clarification. And with that, we will move to the second item on the agenda, the introduction of commission members. You're looking.
Okay, we'll go. Julie Winter. Cheryl Moss.
Mike Sullivan.
Mike Petra. Mike Clayton.
Matthew Voss.
Okay. And third is the approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Agenda is approved. Approval of the minutes of June 19th, 2024. Do we have a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. And now we have the public forum. This is a time where any member of the audience can come up and speak on an issue that is not on the agenda for this evening. Do we have anybody who wishes to speak? Okay. Next item on the agenda is the zoning text amendment to the Downtown Service Center, DSC zoning district development standards for floor area ratio, FAR, and height exceptions.
Good evening. Ames Silversmithing at 220 Main Street recently purchased the adjacent building at 218 Main Street with the intent of expanding their jewelry store business. The owners would like to demolish 218 and to expand 220 for the increased space. Both 220 and 218 are single story, and the zoning district for the Downtown Service Center, DSC, contains regulations designed to achieve minimum intensity of use. And the zoning provisions prevent Ames Silversmithing from expanding as they intend. In a letter to council, Ames Silversmithing's architect, Mike Stott, stated that it wasn't feasible to expand into the existing building and that demolishing 218 is the only feasible alternative. The parcel containing 218 is very narrow, and it is less than 14 feet at the front and widens to a little over 15 feet at the rear. DSC has several provisions that work to create density of use, which is a stated goal of the district. The minimum FAR, floor area ratio, is a 1, which means that if a parcel, say, has 10,000 square feet, it would have to have a 10,000 square foot building, and it has a minimum floor count of 2 to mimic the historic nature of most of the buildings buildings along Main Street. The DSZ zoning district has been amended several times over the past 20 years to create an exception process that does allow for exceptions to the FAR and the floor count. However, it does not currently include buildings on Main Street. They're only buildings on the north edge of the district are currently eligible for that exception. The proposed ordinance here would allow for any building within the DSC zoning district to apply for the exception. An exception is different than a variance. A variance has a very high bar in Iowa. It has to meet a legal criteria that you show that there's an economic hardship, not just a desire to do something different. And so we have an exception section in our code that allows for very narrowly tailored deviations from the code, which includes the exception in DSC. The amended section of code just deletes the geographical constraints that are currently in DSC, and staff does recommend approval of the ordinance as written. I can take any questions.
Has it historically been back in the day a two-story?
Historically, yes, there were two-story buildings on, I believe, it was both of these properties, but they've been gone for quite some time. The demolition of those structures predates the DSC in its current incarnation.
So I guess I have a comment and then a question about that. The general comment is related to how the text is written as far as any person on Main Street at this point in the same situation could apply for this particular circumstance and then be allowed to expand a one-story building. In my professional experience, I've seen a lot of buildings unexpectedly go down by fire, by deferred maintenance. It's not uncommon for us to potentially see some areas on Main Street become available and then to have this one-story issue happen more than just in this area. So I guess my question to you is, has staff received other requests similar to this recently or as far back as you can go? How prevalent do you think this might be?
Good question. So we have received definitely inquiries over the years for building owners who want to, say, expand an existing non-conforming structure. And as it is written right now, the code is all or nothing. There's no partial increase. You have to, if you're adding on to, say, a one-story building that's less than 1 FAR, you would have to add on. You would have to do both of those things in order to just add on any small amount. And there has been interest in changing that. There, to your point about would this lead to unforeseen changes in the building stock that are complying. The exception process goes before the zoning board of adjustment, and there are criteria that do have to be met for this. So, in this case, I think we would take into account, in particular, the narrowness of the lot. I think that's a very relevant factor here. That it's 13 feet and change at the front and 15 feet and change at the rear. And that does make, especially the adding on the second story, difficult logistically. So I think there's still that, that gate, that fence of the exception process that, requires evaluation by staff. Staff writes the exception report, makes a presentation to the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment makes the decision. So we can make a recommendation in that. And I don't know that we would make it just for anyone who wants it, but we're evaluating it based on the circumstances that are unique to that property.
One follow-up question then. If you picture yourself standing in front of Ames Silversmithing right now, and then you look to the right, that adjacent building is a two-story building. I don't know the width of that parcel. But if we would pass this as written, and let's say we don't want anything to happen to that building, but let's say something happens and that building needs to be demolished, would we then be able to apply the same thing if this building owner here wanted to expand to the right, would this then apply to that? Because that's a 2-story building
Mhm.
to the right.
I mean, it would all depend upon the
Yeah, I think as it's currently written, there's two categories. There's new construction and there's additions. So if it's an addition,
but you asked about additions, right?
Yeah, I'm asking
right, so
about,
it's an addition to an existing building, it would apply everywhere. If it's your situation happens and it's a vacant lot and it's not an addition, it is not exempt. So
Right.
the intent was to accommodate non-conforming properties. They're looking for incremental expansion, but to still say we don't want to encourage demolition and replacement with a single story building. We wanted to see the more intense 2-story building still be required.
right.
That's how it's
Yeah.
written and structured.
Yeah, the lot to the east is not a small property. So I think that would be a different case when we were evaluating such a request.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's not a hard and fast requirement. It would all be somewhat subjective based on Board of Adjustment.
Correct. There's no requirement in there that it be a particularly narrow lot or anything like that.
All right, so the language is on page 2 of the report. The text amendment is very easy in the fact that it's only striking language. It's not adding any. So 29808 4B is what the zoning board of adjustment is looking at. It is definitely focused on that the structure itself, the addition meets the intent of character along Main Street versus really judgment of need, viability, something else.
I think that the circumstances of the existing narrow building being also 1 story would matter as well in our
Yeah.
evaluation of
And I
the
agree
exception
with that.
application.
In this case, I support in this case that it's a difficult situation as far as how you expand, how do you accommodate that. But I'm worried about opening up a can of worms on Main Street. So I guess I'll just leave that as my personal comment that I am a bit concerned that would open us up to losing density on Main Street if we're looking 10, 20 years down the road. That's something I have concerns with related to striking that it's only applicable to 6th Street, that it would then be allowed on Main Street. So that's just a general comment.
I'm going to tease that out just a little bit more to make sure we represent that right in the minute.
Okay.
So you're concerned that a 2-story building would not have a 2-story addition?
So we do have several different areas on Main Street where we have 1-story buildings. And it's not unheard of, if you look decades down the road, that we may lose 2-story buildings in the future.
Mhm.
And I could see opportunities then where this that we're talking about tonight could then apply to, for example, allowing an expansion, just like we're talking about right now, for a building owner who wants to create jobs, and I appreciate all of that. But then we're losing the density of downtown, potential upper story housing spaces. Even this floor area ratio, you're allowed to do 0.5 instead of 1, so you would lose commercial square footage on any expansion as well. And so I feel like we do need to be flexible to a certain extent with our policies, but I think that could be the detriment of density for the downtown potentially if we start thinking about all the what if situations. But just my general comment, did that capture it correctly, Kelly?
I understand it.
Okay.
I'm not going to say
Helpful.
it's correct or wrong. Okay. So in general, okay. Thank you.
Well, yes, I have similar concerns, and I guess the question I have, and I don't know if I understand this completely or if this is not the smartest question in the world, but I mean, is there any way instead of just eliminating item 2 there under 29808 4B, could you instead somehow I'm trying to think, like, grandfathering is probably not the right term, but if there's a structure that's already 1 story or already doesn't meet FAR, could it be allowed under an expansion to could you have a clause for that situation rather than just opening it up to the entire DSC? You understand what I'm saying?
Your question is, could you add on only a 1 story if it's an existing 1 story?
Yes. So like in this situation, if you wrote something to that effect, it would allow for this,
Mhm.
but it would not allow under a situation that we're talking about here, where if a existing two-story needs to be demolished or something, that couldn't be expanded on that parcel as anything less than a two-story, I guess. I don't know, does that make sense, or is that?
I mean, you're the recommending body.
No, I
so
know,
you
but
can make a-
from
you
a
can make
like logistical
recommendation you
standpoint,
want.
I guess.
Okay. I see what you're
That's
saying.
the question I have, is something like that would be, rather than opening up the entire, because the character of Main Street is very different than the character of the front of Sixth Street, I guess. I think there's a reason for that. I mean, in the purpose statement of the, later in here, what is that? Purpose statement of the ordinance.
Mhm.
It says developments tend to be very dense with high building coverage. So I think just opening it up to the entire DFC might change that. Yes. So that's, I share concerns there. Yes. Want to know if there's some way we can accomplish for this property what we're trying to accomplish, but not open it up to the entire DSC.
So how, I'm just trying to play out that scenario, kind of in the vein of what Julie had mentioned. So my neighbor, I'm one story, I'm existing. So you're saying I get the advantage of taking advantage of this. I buy the property next door that's 2 stories. I demolish it, which was your concern, for the sake of doing my 1-story addition. So even though I'm an existing 1-story building, I'm going to be able to take advantage of this under your comment.
No,
I'm also not, I'm kind of going against what you were concerned about.
no, I'm saying that in any addition on that property is a two-story, so that would have to remain a two-story.
Only, okay.
You build an addition, but you'd have to create space above the second story.
Only properties that
Only properties that
have or contain a 1-story building may take advantage of this, whether it's
so you're not changing the character, you're replacing like with like.
Could it be written such that if you, regardless of the number of floors you have now or stories you have now, 1 or 2, that it be written such that if a building is being replaced, it would need to have the current, a minimum of the current number of stories or higher. So you could put in a second story if you wanted to, but if you're demolishing a 1-story, you could replace it with a 1-story.
Same with that.
What I'm saying.
Is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Or if you wanted to, you could
it could be written.
So you're saying replace like with like, basically.
yeah, or higher, yeah.
At minimum, replace like
Minimum
with like.
minimum with like. I think that would take care of your concern in the future then too.
And it would also allow this. to go
Yeah,
forward.
and then these can go ahead and do the project or envision.
You're still going to the zoning board of adjustment to get relief. Your eligibility is still based on being a 1-story building, but you're limited in your relief to just replacing in kind or replacing in.
Yeah.
It could be. I think we could structure that. Since
Yeah, I'm trying to think through the implications because they bought, it's a neighboring parcel, so they're gonna, their intent is to combine the parcels, and it's the combination that triggers. Well, actually, no, you could combine without.
Yeah,
applying, but
I think in what Michael just said, James Silversmith is fine because it's 1-story and 1-story, and in any combination you come up with, it's 1 and 1 story. And then it does address what Julie was concerned about, is the removal of a 2-story and only replacing it with a 1-story, regardless of addition or new construction.
Right.
Then.
I mean, I guess that's also a question to this committee as well. I mean, we obviously have a very narrow parcel here, and its intended use is probably not going to be rebuilt. With this, the best use is probably for this owner to do something like that. I mean, should we be more lenient and recommend a policy that allows leniency in the best use of space, even if it's not how it was? I mean, I guess I'm curious to hear from others too, what you think. I may be a little bit on one side of this from a planning perspective. maybe a little technical.
My question is, on Main Street, how, if we're going for density of usage, is that really happening? I, many years ago, lived on the corner of Main and Douglas, and but it's hard to keep up the housing, at least it was decades ago, and have it close to code. So I'm curious, are there other uses, or are those housing units actually being used and not being run down? And are they being renovated when necessary to keep up with the quality of apartments and housing? And if there's stores, are they?
So you're asking about the DSC minimum requirements, how that might affect, how it might relate to what the second stories are used for?
I'm just curious whether right now those second stories are being used. I mean, it's great to walk down Main Street and see that historical stuff and read the plaques.
Okay, you're asking, what is it preserving with having the second stories? Most of the second stories are used. I understand your question now. Yes, and there are over 100 units downtown. About half of them are in the Sheldon Munn, and then there are many others sprinkled throughout the second stories and a few basement units. Actually, I think that building where you were might be the only one that has basement units. But there are, yes, there are very few second stories that are fallow, that are not being used for anything. Most of them are active in some way, whether it's an office or co-working space or a yoga studio or housing.
I think currently the downtown apartments are considered a little bit of a premium product, so people have renovated and they're getting high priced rent when they have renovated. So I would say the quality of the housing downtown is good. And then we do have rental code enforcement, so the true safety issues are addressed on at least a 4-year cycle, if not sooner. But what we've seen is the trend is to renovate into nicer units and charge a premium rent for that. So I would say the health, when you can meet code on the second story, it seems to make sense to use the second story at this point. And then, as Benjamin said, there's a few buildings that just can't keep building code or fire code on for reusing the second floor, and those are empty. But there's not a lot of that.
Yeah, and there's some trickiness about whether a building has been continuously used as residential that grandfathers you for certain requirements. And so there are a few buildings that weren't used for residential that can't quite meet the code to convert to residential. But we've eliminated recently some minimum on-site parking requirements as well. That I think should a new building, 2-story building, get built and want to have parking on a second story, the zoning is a place for that to happen. I think there's the demand for it as well.
A couple of questions, and start out by saying I share the same concern about preserving character downtown. I think placing like makes a lot of sense. But the question I have is really about the table in section 3, zone development standards. Does that apply to only new construction? Does that apply to all construction?
Which part specifically?
29808, paragraph 3, the table that says zone development standards.
It applies to everything. So right now, that's the issue for them, is either you 100% comply with new construction or with any increment of addition on the property.
I see. So under minimum FAR and under minimum height, it seems like ZBA already has authority through a special use to grant an exception on a case-by-case basis and keep it within the character of the existing structure. So
You have been deceived, as many have before you.
tell me more.
I wanted to correct this sentence that's in there.
Benjamin
but
tried to
Kelly
change it.
Kelly said I should
Stop right
keep it.
there. Yeah. So, I remember when I said this happened about 7 years ago.
Yeah.
So something like in the range of 7 years ago, we did this specific text amendment to allow. What's important here is you must already be a special use to take advantage of the ZBA granting you relief. So the types of uses in downtown that are special uses are basically institutional uses. We've had the church take advantage of it. We've had Adam's Funeral Home take advantage of it. So uses that are not actually, they might have like a 2-story building that do not have floor area, or they have just other elements that didn't meet those requirements, but they could still meet the character. So the way that was specifically written is very narrowly applied to uses that are already special uses.
I see.
Because they were unique. They were not mercantile uses. They weren't restaurants. They weren't office buildings. So yes, it seems like it says one thing, but it was intentionally written that way to be very narrowly applied.
My only other comment about that then is that the language that talks about how the design is compatible with the character and the surrounding seems to make a lot of sense, and maybe that should be applied as part of the standards under the section 4. Is that currently all in? Right? Is that part of the requirements that
Yes.
you have to make?
So on the bottom of page 2, which would be proposed new subsection 3, the proposed project has to demonstrate the height and building placement that emphasizes an urban design of Main Street style development characterized by a height compatible with buildings in downtown and maintaining or creating a street edge with buildings. And the one above that is the project must retain or create an active pedestrian street entrance. So those are the two things that still apply to you as you go to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. So the obvious bad examples be, I can't do a 1-story addition, just do a brick wall on Main Street. You still have to have storefronts. You still have to have a parapet, something that it's going to add character and height to the building, regardless of your desired use. So silversmithing's willing and able to do that, so they're confident they can convince CBA that they're able to do that. And that's really the threshold that gets applied in this context.
And in discussions with Ames Silversmithing and their architects, their desire for the expansion to the east there is to reproduce the existing facade of Ames Silversmithing just to that use space.
I mean, I'll just say as a comment, I like the suggestion of modifying this ordinance change to include some sort of like for like, whether it's stories or the FAR, because I think, yeah, I do share the same concerns about sort of unintended consequences of just applying this to, or striking the 6th Street and applying it as written to all DOC.
Just curious about one other thing. Why was 0.5 selected as the minimum FAR?
So that this whole section was written 4 years ago at the request of another project that we were trying to thread a needle on. So the that project could definitely achieve 0.5, and I'm not sure if that was the reason that we picked that, or I believe it was more along the lines that we knew that could be achieved for that project. And a 0.5 is still more than a typical 1-story building, but it could easily be done with no parking on as a 1-story building also. So 0.5 was achievable, but it wasn't as bad as the standard commercial buildings, 0.2 parking all around it.
I'm curious, has anyone else has anyone else on 6th Street taken advantage of this or attempted to take advantage of this in the time? Other than that one example.
No. Friedrich Realty was the one that took advantage. It was written to address their expansion of their office building on the corner of 6th. And they're the only property that has done anything on 6th Street that this would apply to. So there's a couple under that special use permit criteria, but that's the only one on 6th.
Okay.
So I think you're touching upon there's a bit of a tension here because we all appreciate the historic character of downtown. Zoning regulates form, and the function is kind of interchangeable on Main Street because the form is regulated. And we've seen this many times, and council has chipped away at it a little bit, but they've also tried to hold firm to kind of the same concepts you're talking about tonight. So I think If there's a motion, there's other ways to do this. I think what you've discussed tonight might be a fine way to do it in lieu of how we have it proposed. But that is kind of the issue that we hear as staff. You have people who want to make small investments, and our code is about maintaining either existing things or seeing substantial investments, which is what intensity is really relating to. So I think you're right on the pulse of the issue. I'm curious how you recommend to go.
Okay. Is the applicant here? Would the applicant like to make a statement?
Don't believe they're present tonight. Nope. Go for it. If you want to.
I don't know if I no.
Okay.
Matt, Cambridge. The reason I think they want to do a one-story building is because they're afraid that someone in an apartment up above would break in through the floor to get into their building and they have some problems that way. That's what I know about it. But I'm hearing you guys talk and I'm thinking, well, if the building becomes dilapidated and they tear it down and then 5 years later they want to build another building, that could be a problem too. So how do you write this to say that you have to have a timeline or you have to have a date that says on this date it was a 2-story building? You have to keep it that way, right? Like that. I don't know. It's complicated either way you write it. So I think it still has to be. Well, if you want to do that, you have to come before the unanimous approval. It's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Are there any members of the audience to offer further comments and questions? Okay. Okay. City has any concluding remarks?
Kelly, in just thinking about the language to address the concerns of the commission, it would putting something in about new projects cannot lessen the intensity of development, or is that something that I'm just thinking on the fly? Is that something that you think would be easy to enforce?
Yeah, I guess which is what we typically do with the commission. If you make a recommendation, it's not what we have, we will take what your comment or recommendation is, and we'll try to structure language to meet the intent. That's what we've done in the past, unless you have a really specific proposed language. We'll just take a motion of and understand the intent, and we'd have to craft something that's workable on our side and see if that works and matches up with how council would look at it.
Okay.
So.
I have an idea for. I guess I wrote something down, but you can tell me if it makes sense or not. I think maybe what we're towards. So it sounds like keeping the elimination of the 6th Street item 2, but then adding a bullet saying maintains existing FAR at number of stories of most recent existing structure or something along those lines. That's kind of what I'm thinking. I don't know. It sounds like maybe what other people are thinking.
I think that sounds similar. Yeah.
Does anyone else have thoughts on that? I guess that language, if there's anything different you're thinking.
I think that would be fine with me. I will say if there's a way to write like maintains the current intensity, maybe that's a little bit more flexible and allows for more judgment that could still be done in an effective way.
The question to me of enforcing that becomes what happens if you do have an abandoned building, current use versus what it's being used for. If a building is like totally in shambles and it was a 2-story building and then it's basically been demolished by course of fire, how does one, I don't know. I know I go back to fire, but we see it so much on Main Street. So.
My hometown, Main Street, burned down. And replace, the buildings that in Missouri, but I'm thinking we're kind of an exception, maybe even in Iowa, in having a vibrant downtown. And so my concern was, a bunch of rundown buildings that are historical, but they're rundown. And I've used a few, like gone for a massage or something and I've talked to the owners who have moved around town sometimes, and sometimes have been historically, or in the past years, the space doesn't always really meet the needs of the usage. It's hard to, and they usually, in the past, if it's becoming more vibrant and popular and renovated, it may no longer be the case, but the space doesn't always match what is needed. But it's historical, so it stays there. That would be my one concern, but it does reassure me to know that it is more vibrant than it was 40 years ago when I worked down there.
So do we have a motion?
I think I have one.
Can-
Okay, so I'll move, recommend the city council amend the zoning ordinance differently from what staff recommend in attachment C to say, we'll keep the elimination of item 2, the 6th Street, but then another item 6, item 6, the proposed expansion maintains or exceeds FAR and number of stories of most recent existing structure.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? No, motion passes.
I brought a pen. I'll write it better for you.
Okay, the next item is the zoning text amendment to the PUD overlay section 29.114 of the Ames Municipal Code for infill and design standards. That's a mouthful.
All right, so I'll present this one tonight. So we have a combination of items here. I listed them off as 3 things, and I'll kind of walk through each one of them, and then we can have discussion. They're a combination. The reason we're here is this combination of issues related to ongoing discussions about housing design and housing standards to promote diversity of housing in the city. That, as I referenced earlier, a request from the Ames Economic Development Corporation to ask council to reconsider to look at policies that might accelerate housing construction in the city. So the first issue that we talked about is how to apply the PUD in situations. When a PUD was first written, it was modeled off of another type of zone that we have called a planned residence district. I love you guys love history of zoning ordinances, so I'll keep going a little while. So in 2000, we rewrote our zoning ordinance. The city intentionally tried to eliminate one-off processes like PUDs. A lot of cities rely on PUDs to correct problems in a zoning ordinance that they don't want to deal with, and just say, "Well, go get a PUD and make a custom plan for you every single time." So in 2000, the city kind of wanted to get away from that. They wanted to get away from custom, unique approvals and just say, "We want to have regulations that work for everybody, do the same thing repeatedly that can achieve our objectives." So when in 2000 happened, PUDs were deleted and replaced with the planned residence district. In that time, they didn't want small projects to try to get deviations. So they had a 2-acre size. So the PUD overlay at that time was still thought of as something that would get applied in greenfield situations on the edge of the city to promote a townhouse project or a small lot development, something like that. So we just carried over the 2-acre threshold. Since that was done, we've had our Plan 2040 adopted. We've had a number of discussions about infill housing options in the city. And we've yet to have an opportunity to really rewrite zoning that could fully implement different housing objectives for infill sites. So kind of as an interim option, we're suggesting that we remove the 2-acre minimum size for the PUD. It would then allow for a 1-acre site to be able to come in and maybe do a townhome project that would not be possible otherwise. So you won't be able to come in with one lot, somehow get 2 houses on one lot with this. You'll never meet the expectations here, but it's more for those half-acre, 1-acre, 1.5 acre, those things where you can actually see a kind of a combination of houses being built, and maybe appropriate and context sensitive to its surroundings. So what we're doing is trying to streamline that option. So if someone wants to move forward with that and go straight to design, they can come forward with that design project and that zoning action all as one thing. And then we're not talking about whether we should change density to change building types and a bunch of other things. We can focus strictly on design now. The PUD overlay helps us do that. Otherwise, people come in and they want to do something, they need to get to a higher intensity zoning district that allows for different buildings. And you argue about, geez, I really want 18 houses there, 12 would have been better. Well, you could have done 12, but you can't do townhomes. So we think this is a better compromise to do that. And then one little thing that we've added in relation to the infill is rounding is a big deal on small projects. So if you have a 9-unit project, getting a 10th unit might make it financially feasible. So we wanted to make sure that, again, to encourage infill, that now we're saying you get your calculated density plus 1. So you're never going to get to like 9.9 units and then have to go down to 9. You're going to get 10. So it's essentially the same thing as rounding up, but in this case, it's just clear you get your density plus 1 every single time. So it's a small little give in terms of trying to help the feasibility of a small project. I mean, if it's a large subdivision, you have 150 homes, 151 homes is probably not make or break, but on a 5-unit project, 5 or 4 is a big deal. So that's our approach on that. The second part is really a unique type of development that we're calling a pocket neighborhood. It's a concept that exists across the country. It is a niche product. It is not something that's commonly done. It's usually because people really believe it's kind of a close-knit cluster of housing. It's a smaller type of project. We've described as between 5 and 12 units because it's meant to be oriented around a common shared space, like essentially a shared front yard, for lack of a better way to describe that. So you organize around one yard area. And if you have more units, you don't really have that close-knit small yard. So you can do multiple clusters in a project, but ideally they're clustered around one space. So within the PUD, we're creating a carve-out for one particular type of development, and it's going to get extra relief from the design standards. So having lot frontage on streets would not be required. It allows for some other deviations in coverage and size. And it does allow, because the thought process is that many of these homes could be smaller, that it's possible you don't need to have a 2-car home. You can have a 1-car home. So we're offering that if you did this pocket neighborhood, you could have one required parking space for half of the homes instead of all of them requiring 2. Parking can be on site or in the development. So these are all things that are necessary to kind of meet this configuration goal. Attached to the report was some examples from other communities, places that have a few of these have been built, or other design standards that would kind of illustrate what our goal is. Now, to do this, you still have to rezone to a PUD. You have to go to council and commission and have the design approved. And it's meant to be a really specific type of thing. So I don't think we'll see it often, but we wanted to make it available because it does seem to hit the target on goals for diversity of housing if someone really wanted to build this. Now, the third one is a design detail that we have in the PUD overlay. This request for the change came from the AEDC in regards to, they thought the PUD ordinance to be more usable if we did not have a specific design standard in relation to the garage. So when we adopted this overlay a few years back, this was a point of discussion. The decision was we wanted to emphasize pedestrian-friendly character of a neighborhood. It's intended to be a denser environment, a smaller, kind of close-in type of projects. We want to still have features that were attractive from a pedestrian scale and not just have garages dominate streets. At the thought was there's really no yard areas, there's not a lot of separation. So it would just become a wall of garages. So we wrote this standard that the garage can't define the character of the development. And what that meant was it can't really protrude in front of the house. So the developers, in certain cases, would say, I've built product in other places. I don't build a lot of homes that have an even facade with the front door or the porch and the garage. Like they feel like they can't produce a house that they build in or Milwaukee or somewhere else. Some models can, but not all. So the request was to remove the requirement, or at least a hard restriction, about garage location in relation to the front door. So we've proposed, in response to that, we still think that the character element's important. So our proposal is to take the language from the recently adopted duplex two-family home standards. And in that case, it's being inserted to existing neighborhoods that often don't have protruding garages. And we said the maximum setback then is 12 feet to the front door. So we're taking the standard from the duplex requirements and we're putting it into the PUD ordinance. Our suggestion is then that the front door could be 12 feet back from the garage. The porch could be built in front, but it's not to the edge of the porch, it's to the front. That would match that. There's other ways to look at that. It depends on how flexible you want to get, how much you want to try to maintain that character. We're trying to be a little bit more pedestrian-oriented features on the front of the house. That's our recommendation, to try to maintain the intent of that standard and give some flexibility with the 12-foot setback. So kind of three wildly different issues, but they all fit in the PUD overlay, so they're all being presented together tonight. Any questions?
So I do have one question about this code define a single family.
In what regards?
So for instance, with PUD in an RN1, RN2 neighborhood, if you can define it, would that allow for people to build maybe tiny homes, manufactured houses, without a fixed foundation inside, adjacent to
No,
single family homes?
No. So we, in our code, we allow for a manufactured home on a foundation can go anywhere. The key is you have a foundation. We have a minimum size of 400 square feet. We do not allow living in any mobile trailer as a flat out prohibition across the city, except for in our RLP zoning, which is our manufactured home or mobile home park zoning district. So if you really wanted to establish, I mean, you'd have to establish an RLP zone to have anything that is not on a foundation. So so the definition of a single family home is it must be, it can be factory built, it can be stick built, it can be whatever, but it must be on a foundation connected to utilities permanently, and it has to be at least 20 by 20 in its dimension.
That 20 by 20, is that
It is not. So an ADU is not considered a single family dwelling. It's defined as an accessory dwelling.
there's a maximum?
There's a maximum size, not a minimum size. So the dimensions are not minimums for accessory structures, just the primary structure.
I guess I had one staff question. You said that you got feedback from developers saying that they did not like the garage standard, or it was hard to meet that based on the current requirement. I don't have strong opinions about it. I think I can remember Kelly had some strong opinions about it on this committee. So yeah, that was my question.
I think it's more, right. I think it's if you're trying to attract a builder to town that's built something else and they're told that they can't build what they've built before, they don't spend the effort to try to do a new thing in Ames that they haven't done before. I think that was essentially, that was our experience on one really specific project is, well, we're not going to redesign just to come to Ames.
Right.
Question about plexus.
Mhm.
Could there be approved a pocket neighborhood of plexus?
Yeah. So that the pocket neighbor can be attached or detached units.
consistent with the spirit of the duplex code. And the duplex is kind of an exception to something that
So the PUD kind of sets aside those general standards, and you're getting a unique approval for your project. So the way the duplex two-family code is written is it's assuming you're building in an existing neighborhood. So it has controls to try to make you compatible with the block you're building on. In the PUD, you get to set the expectations. You're designing the block, so you get to set the compatibility standards. Now, we do have those basic ones in here about front door orientation and some of those other elements that would still apply. But that's how you would look at it, is through the PUD lens only.
Any further questions? Nope. Okay, anybody wish to speak on this issue from the audience?
Please. Good evening, Commission. My name is Justin Dodge, Hunsinger Companies, 105 South 16th Street. Want to thank Kelly and staff for working through this PUD amendment. If you think back to a few years ago, we had a townhome project on North Delaware. So in between Delaware and North Dakota. Hopefully you've all been able to drive by and see the beautiful townhomes that we were able to build there. This is one of those, that would have been one of those projects I would have loved to have done a PRD instead of rezoning it to medium density. And we had to design the project where we had to fit 6 units because that was the minimum in medium density. So really the PUD tool helps give a lot more flexibility to projects. And if you think back to that site, that was 3/4 of an acre. And so the change that is before you would open it up for some of those smaller infill sites to utilize this tool. So really think that that's going to be a great help for anybody looking at projects. The other topic I wanted to talk about was garages. And so why we would like to not have the garages or have the face of the house, either abutting the face of the garage or within 12 feet is the most economical and the most efficient use of your lot frontage is to have the garage in the front and then build the home behind that garage. That's why you see the majority of the homes that are constructed in Ames and Iowa and around the country have that same design. Because if you think about your paving costs, your street, if you're 31 feet back to back, you're paying by linear feet for your cost for your street. Same with your sanitary sewer, your main, you're paying by the foot. Same with water, you're paying by the foot. And so the narrower you can make those lots, the more efficient they are, and the cheaper you can sell the lots for to builders. And so that's why we're looking for that flexibility within this tool to have the garage on the front side of the home. So in hearing Kelly's report, I think that there's a solution there. Certainly in some of the neighborhoods that were built in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, where you do have the face of the house matching up with the face of the garage, that makes a lot of sense. And so maybe for those infill opportunities, we have the standard that Kelly is talking about. But then in new greenfield sites, we allow more of what we're seeing in typical construction today, where the garage is actually in front of the house. So that's the rationale of why we would like that flexibility with the garage in relation to the face of the house. So Kelly did a great job of talking a little bit about the history of this tool. It used to be the PRD, and within that tool that was created in 2000, we had to set aside 40% of our land for open space. And so I only remember a couple of times in my 10 years at Hunsikers that we ever used that tool. It's when we had a weird site that we could carve off 40% as unusable. Most of the time, that it's 10% or less that we're trying to set aside as open space. And so within PUD, then the standard dropped down to 10%. And so like, this is great. We're going to be able to use this tool. We looked at it on a farm that the family owns and had a builder out of Des Moines looking to do their smart home series that they do all over Des Moines Metro. They just wrapped up a project a couple of weeks ago in Boone where they just wrapped this all up for the same ones that we sold a bunch of lots to in West Ames. And you know, they built 15 homes like that and at a great price point and have been very popular. Anyway, long story short, they brought up, you know, their 14 floor plans, and we discovered that 12 of the 14 won't work because of the orientation of the garage to the face of the home. That's a lot to redesign, you know, 14 homes on a project that we could just move quickly and bring to the market at an affordable price. We were really excited about it. But then when we started looking at what our options were, okay, well, if we're forced to redesign all their homes, what other option do we have within zone? And so we had shifted gears and we could do FSRL, and the difference was we only lost one lot. So we were really excited about using this tool, but this garage limitation hinders it. And so we have not even used this new zoning tool that we were really excited for when it was getting revised from the PRD. So that's why we're asking for that. But like I said, I understand staff's perspective in wanting to protect those existing neighborhoods. I would do the exact same thing if I were in their shoes. However, in greenfield sites, I think a little bit more flexibility would be warranted. So that's all I've got. Happy to answer any questions anybody might have. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
It says here, yeah, the current requirement is garages and off-street parking areas must be located so they do not define the front facade of the dwelling. So,
Which meant they could not protrude in front of the entryway features. So, I mean, you still were on the front facade. It wasn't like it was rear loaded or detached. You had to have a porch or some other element of the house go in front of the garage was how that was administered the couple times we've used it.
Kelly, I guess I have a follow-up question for you just about, I mean, are there other communities that have this same standard that Ames has?
About the garage.
About the garage.
The only one that might have it on occasion would be Des Moines because they have a form-based code, and every building type has a definition for character rather than just zoning for density. None of the suburbs that I know of have any standard like this, and that's mostly based on when we adopted the PUD overlay. Because again, we talked about this and said this is a little bit unique. So I don't believe anybody else really has a standard like this in just their basic general approach to single-family development. There will always be some offshoot of a zoning district, like we do in our single-family conservation overlay for downtown areas that have stuff like that. But Greenfield is very. You got to come up to the mic if you want to talk.
I do a lot of family homework in the city of Des Moines, and so that 2 years ago they changed the zoning code. So now your garage, if it's on the front of your house, can only be 30% of the front facade. Plus, it also has to be back like the requirements. So I've worked with a few builders, and they try to get around this requirement by taking the house that they've already had redesigned, and they just give up where they did that. But in an infill lot, I think you should also be allowed to, at least within 500 feet or the block, to say, well, this guy did it, so I should be able to do it too. There should be some of that kind of flexibility in this PUD that says that if I'm in an infill lot, I can copy some of the features that are nearby. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have a question about the language that's underlined there in the garage and driveways where it says the front entry is set back typically no more than 12 feet to the front door. Is that seems like kind of could be open to interpretation, I guess. Is that the purpose of that qualifier, or why is it not just no more than 12 feet?
It could be in the spirit that the PUD is flexible and you have to show it's a house design to get approved. If it's 13 feet, are we going to reject it? I don't know. If it's 15, probably, because that starts to get further and further away. So I put typically in as 12 just to give a small shade of flexibility beyond that. If it's 12, then even council can't approve something else, again, without a text amendment.
Right.
So the intent of this structure is that like I said, the few projects that have done this, one of them is Hayden's Ridge Townhomes, and they built some duplexes. They had some townhomes, but also built some duplex by attached units in there. And their approach was essentially the garage was equal with the front plane of some of the living area. The door is recessed, but then they brought the covered entry just to the front, just to project in front of that front plane of that. So that was the way of meeting it then. So you could still do that with this language, or they could have, now with this language, you could just be 12 feet back. You still have to meet the design elements here of saying you have a front door that's identifiable and visible and has those features of the front door, but you wouldn't have to bring any element of the home to be equal with the garage facing. Right. And you've always been allowed in the PUD to bring the living area in front of the garage. It was the restriction on setting it back that was the issue. So if you wanted a 5-foot front yard setback, you wanted the living area and the porch to go all the way up to 5 feet, and the garage to still be back 20. And we're adamant garage has to be 20. You don't have a functional driveway, so that's why that number is there for parking of a car, not blocking the sidewalk. So that's the relationship that was there. So we're always willing to accept going forward. It was trying to limit the more recessed design. And to be honest, it was also some of the townhome designs, which you can do in FSRL. So if you can just go to straight zoning, there's no limit on your door design. There's a number of townhome type of developments where the front door is really just 4 feet and it's recessed 25 feet back from the street. And that is not what this is trying to allow for. Whether it's set back a lot or not, identifying the front door, making it a feature of the home is really that core piece of this compatibility standard that we want to bring into this, regardless.
We have a motion.
Move approval of alternative 1, that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommends that the city council approve changes to the PUD overlay that allows for infill developments less than 2 acres with a 1.0 unit density bonus. B, pocket neighborhood standards, and C, garages to protrude in front of a front facade.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Commission comments? Thanks for coming.
Probably, I think we have probably 2 things that are in line to be here. So in August, you'll have your second meeting.
Any staff comments?
I don't think I do this time. We're looking at trying to think back. June 19th was a long time ago. I think at this point I don't really have anything to add. So there's probably some more stuff coming up in September we can highlight for you.
Motion to adjourn?
So move.